So if you've saved $1 million or more for retirement, you've done everything right. You made the sacrifices, you live below your means, and you've built real wealth. But the exact habits that helped you build that wealth aren't the ones that will keep it safe. Now, today we're covering 7 critical blind spots that can wipe out retirements. Because if you don't catch these traps now, the nest egg you spent decades building could disappear, or worse, you'll spend your entire retirement too terrified to actually enjoy it. So today, we're going to show you how to fix these inefficiencies so you can finally transition from building your wealth to enjoying it. I'm Darren Hesselink. This is Alex Bars. Let's get into it. So Alex, let's start with mistake number 1. The biggest thing that I look at as a threat to wealth today, no one seems to be talking about. And if you don't keep your defenses up, it could cost you a huge chunk of your life's work just in an instant.
Yes, and we are talking about here the Nigerian prince. So it's a little more sophisticated than that. We're talking about scams. So I've been doing this for over 25 years, and I remember when the Nigerian prince thing first came to lights or became common, and it was laughable, right? Nobody falls for that, okay? But in the last few years, we have noticed these scammers getting so sophisticated that it's really easy to fall for something. We're talking as opposed to, someone sending you money from Nigeria. Now it's, hey, invest in this crypto, and people spoof the dashboard. It looks just like a major exchange. You think you have stocks, you think you have crypto, you think you have money, you send more money in because you're doing really well, and poof, it's gone. So we've seen losses in the hundreds of thousands through various scams and into the millions. I think it's a multi-billion-dollar loss per year right now.
It is really easy to protect yourself. But what I would say in the challenge is that it's very hard to know how to protect yourself on this stuff because you have 2-factor authentication codes where they're texting you a number and someone's asking you for it over the phone. And there's all these situations where it feels super legitimate that you're being asked for these things. And it feels as if it is the bank calling you. It feels as if it is your, portfolio manager or, someone at the holding fund where you keep your money. And it feels so legit. It feels so right. And that's how they get you. They manufacture it so that you don't second guess anything that's going on as it's happening.
Right. And then once you're stuck and once you've already put some money in, there's something in your psyche that makes you just unwilling to believe that you fell for it once, and so people keep falling for it and keep sending more and more and more money, and that is truly devastating.
Exactly. And once you know what these red flags are, like you can really protect yourself and your nest egg. So one of the ways that we're going to help you do that is in the description below is a report that we put together for all the different scams that are out there right now. So if you want that, just check the description. But the second mistake, it's more of an inside job. It's more in your psyche, right? So if you don't break your lifelong habit of saving and thinking of yourself as a saver, it can actually hold you hostage in your retirement so that you don't enjoy any of the wealth that you've sacrificed to actually build.
Right. And we see this a lot. We see people, it's in their nature. They have saved, they have scrimmed, and they've built this big nest egg, and now it's time to retire. And we go over their budget and they put in saving. It's like, okay, no, you don't need to save in retirements. You've already done that. This is the time you spend it. And we also see people who are, maybe they've seen too many TV shows or heard too many stories, but they've got millions of dollars and, their budget is $50,000 a year and they're terrified to retire. They're like, I'm just worried it's going to run out of money. And it's like, well, you could stuff that in a mattress practically and not have to ever worry about it. So we see people, it's this mentality of, I can't afford that. And it's because they built it throughout their whole lives.
Yeah. And they're going out and buying a used car when they could afford to just lease whatever they want. They're, flying coach and not flying first class and all these simple things that would allow them to enjoy all the fruits of their labor, all the thing they've been focusing on and saving for all this time, decades, 40 years, 30 years, whatever it is. And they're just not using it. They're sitting on their hands being afraid to actually spend any of their own money. And there's so many stories like this.
Yeah. And, one of the things I tell almost every one of my clients is if you don't fly first class, your kids will. because they didn't save this money. You did. You know how much blood, sweat, and tears went into it, and that's why you value it so much. But the number of inheritances we see squandered very quickly, it's very high percentage.
Yeah, and that's the harsh reality. And what we see on the other hand, though, is once you actually start giving yourself permission to spend, you're going to be able to enjoy the retirement that you've been saving all these years for instead of basically just upgrading your children's lifestyle, right? So they're the ones flying first class. But it is impossible to spend confidently if you don't know exactly where your numbers are going to stand on a year-to-year basis. And if you're treating your retirement plan just like this set it and forget it, I built a financial plan and it's sitting on my shelf. If that's your approach to retirement, you could completely expose yourself to market shifts, tax changes, so many different things that could derail your financial plan and your retirement.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people come in with a portfolio and zero plan. It's like, I've got a portfolio. There's a lot of money here. Well, you don't know if it's a lot of money until you put a plan behind it. Because, let's say you have $10 million and you spend $5 million a year. That's not a lot of money, right? Whereas if you have $10 million and you spend $50,000 a year, you should be spending more. So the analogy I like to use is getting in a sailboat. It's like, I've got this really nice sailboat and it can go anywhere I want in the world and not picking a destination, right? So if you just get in a sailboat and start sailing, are you going to end up in Hawaii? It's a nice place, right? Well, you might, but the chances are you're just going to be floating around in the ocean because you never thought about where you're trying to go or how to get there.
And then all of a sudden you're floating on a Cuba and you're arrested. I mean, yeah, it's totally realistic. And then you have to think about how much the world has changed over the last few decades. I mean, you got 2020. I mean, we all know how much changed then. Then you look at 2008 and the Great Recession that we all had to go through. There's so many things that we've been going through on a decade by decade basis that changes everything. It seems like all at once.
Yeah, and tax laws. I mean, the RMDs have changed, I don't know how many times in the last few years. Inherited IRA rules, estate tax rules. It's just wildly different all the time, and you need to keep your plan updated. It doesn't make sense. We saw a client who recently passed away. Their will was, over 20 years old, and they had tax provisions in there that don't even exist anymore.
Yeah, that's something that we definitely have to take care of. And, that's why we're so adamant on you getting an active review process and building some type of roadmap that is flexible, that changes, that adapts to everything going on. But, one of the challenges with that is that even if you have the best roadmap, it's not going to help if you're taking directions from the wrong people. Now, if you're a high net worth retiree following the standard mainstream financial advice, you could be mathematically sabotaging everything that you're doing. And we see it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, most advice out there is for the masses, okay, which is, common example. Wait till 70, take Social Security. Why? Because you'll get more money per month and the chances of you having to eat cat food go way down, right? Because you're not going to run out of money if you have a higher income. That's advice for people who are bad at saving, who don't have good discipline. If you've saved your whole life and you've built up this nest egg, that's not you. Taking Social Security earlier can actually lead to more wealth and more enjoyment in your retirement, even though you're getting a smaller monthly number. And, another example, credit cards, right? If you're talking about to the average American, I'm going to tell you, stay away from credit cards, with a 10-foot pole, right? Don't get near those things. You're going to get yourself in trouble because we all know average American is a terrible saver. Who are you? Well, you don't have a bunch of credit card debt. You have, a bunch of wealth that you've saved. And credit card points, sure, that can be a good thing for you. Why not get extra money on the stuff you spend?
Well, yeah, my neighbor just bought a golf cart with his credit card points. And he obviously doesn't have a problem with saving and investing and all that stuff. And, just seeing someone use it like that, to me, I go, yes, someone gets it. They're using their credit card points. Well, he is a business owner, so he's super boosted than the normal person. But that's just free money. Why wouldn't you use it if you don't have a problem paying off your credit card every month? So that's why you have to separate yourself from this everyday Joe, mainstream advice type scenario where you're using advice built for people that are different than you. You're different. You need advice tailored to yourself. And that brings me to a piece of mainstream advice that society, internet, TikTok, everyone loves to say this, is that you have to be debt free because you need to pay off your house. You need to pay off your cars. You need to never have a payment ever. And on our side of things, we're saying, no, that's going to cost you millions of dollars.
I mean, just a quick, reality check, right? Look at Apple, look at Microsoft. So they're some of the richest companies in the world, and they carry debt. And it's not because they can't afford to do what they're doing. They're doing it strategically. They're not dumb. They do this with teams of people thinking about it and going through this process of what's the best way to do this where we can make the most money. Strategic debts. And that's something that you as a individual can use as well. And it's actually a really powerful tool. Use the example of debt that we may have incurred in the last 5 years where it's a 3% loan, right? Maybe it's 4%, whatever it is, and it's a 30-year mortgage. Would you put money aside for 3% for 30 years? No, you're going to be underperforming for 30 years. Every time you take $1 and kick it to that debt, you just took $1 and actively decided to underperform historical averages. We could get 5, 7, 10%. Instead, we've locking ourselves into 3.
100%. And it makes me think too of that exact same scenario. If you have $1 million in the bank and you owe 300,000 or 500,000 on a house, are you even in debt? Like, you have money that balances out that, but you're paying 3% on the one hand, and your invested money, if it's earning 5 or 7%, that's a no-brainer choice for me because that's going to build my long-term wealth dramatically versus just paying it off. And it's just sometimes that psychological switch that we have to do. But, if you're looking at it just like these companies, you got to think of how can you actually earn more on your money than you're paying in interest, and really going through that whole calculation and looking at it mathematically to figure that out. But, while you're optimizing your leverage, you might be bleeding money somewhere else that comes up for us. We see it all the time. Because one of the things that most people are really missing when they look at their account and their investments is middle managers. And it's just one of the worst hidden fees that we see on a day-to-day basis, just dramatically lowering people's long-term returns. And we see it all the time.
The frustrating part about it is people don't think about it. They don't know about it. It's like reading the headline and not reading the article. Right? So everybody knows if they're doing it themselves or if they're paying an advisor, they know what they're paying there, right? They know what the tax bills are, but they don't look, at the underlying investments and seeing what they are. And this isn't, something that hits everybody, but we see it all the time where, you've got separately managed accounts, maybe some high old mutual funds. These fees can be in the, 1% to 2% range, okay? And that's on top of maybe an advisor fee. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, maybe variable annuities. We've seen those creep up into 3.5% per year range, which is a pretty big drag on your portfolio. Let's assume we're, use 7% as an assumption. If we take off 3.5%, we're taking off half. I mean, that's a big deal. So a lot of people just don't notice this because the market tends to go up over time. Their money tends to go up over time. So they never actually sit down and do the math. But it's totally worth looking at.
Yeah, and one of the biggest ways this happens is when people open their statements, they see a performance number. They see this positive number, but they don't go any further to look into all the back end numbers behind that and compare it to what else you could have achieved if you were in a different account structure. And, you kind of got to play Sherlock Holmes. You got to look at that data. You got to look under the hood, eliminate hidden fees, and really stop this drag on your portfolio that a lot of people just don't know is happening. But the one thing that I would say in addition to that is worse than losing money to fees is losing it to inflation. And if your fear of market crashes causes you to never invest in the market or to be so conservative with your assets that the moment you retire, inflation becomes this animal that could just slowly eat away at everything you saved for and slowly destroy your purchasing power. And we see it all the time.
Yeah, I would say until scams became more prevalent, this was probably the biggest mistake we see. And there's two ways that we see it all the time. The first one's pretty obvious, pretty simple, which is, and they're both fear-based. I'm afraid of market crashes. That's where this comes from. So the first one we see is people put money into a savings account or a CD or something like that, and they let it sit there for decades. I've seen people with millions of dollars in savings accounts for 15 years, 20 years, okay? Just think what that could have grown to. And even if we had the 2008 crash, the 2020 crash, where do you think you'd be after 20 years? You're still way ahead compared to a savings account because that savings account hardly grew at all over that same period of time. The other one we see, also fear-based, and another just much more insidious mistake is these annuities with big bonuses, with income benefits that make these promises that just sound so wonderful, and people don't do the math and turn out they're buying something that's very, very conservative. They just don't know it.
Yeah, and insurance companies are good at one thing. They're good at math, and they're good at making things that are kind of crappy sound really good. It's like, hey, yeah, we're going to give you this burger from McDonald's, but in reality, the way we're talking about it, they're making it sound like a gourmet steak, at the best steakhouse in the United States. So by maintaining balance, using conservative assets for short-term safety, having your long-term investments for growth, you can start to mitigate the threat of that inflation. And that really brings us back to making sure that your structure is efficient, because a bad setup acts as a massive drag on everything we just talked about. So fixing your structure and getting those hidden fees, that's really step one. But even if people do that and think their portfolio is performing well enough, they could still be leaving a massive amount of money on the table, because most people never look under the hood. They assume that if they buy a low expense fund with a specific goal, they're just automatically going to get that best result. But there is a glaring issue in the industry right now, and that is two funds with the exact same goals, even with low expense ratios, can have wildly different returns, resulting in huge swings over a decade. So check out this video next, where we look under the hood and show you exactly how to spot those hidden differences, so you can build a more efficient portfolio that could mean literally millions more in your retirement.